They were really sort of first set up from the 60s, 70s onwards as safe places for brown people to drink.
Award-winning journalist and beer writer David Jesudason's latest book, Desi Pubs, A Guide to British Indian Pubs, Food and Culture, is an absolute revelation, and I'm super excited to share my recent interview with him.
I think they're the best of Britain, and they were the vanguard of multiculturalism.
To celebrate the book's recent launch, Desi Pale Ale was brewed by Meantime, so I seized the opportunity I was given to get to know the brewer behind this delicious collaboration better, Nidhi Sharma.
My journey in brewing started in India, so I kind of wanted to make a beer related to what I had brewed in India. I want to see people like myself, or like more women in the industry.
Hey, so I'm here with David, who has kindly joined me in the midst of his hectic schedule. I'm so happy to have you here to discuss your new book. The reception looks like it's been phenomenal so far. How are you feeling right now?
It's all a bit of a dream, really, like a sort of daydream. You have this thing of, you have very weird expectations. I'm a daydreamer anyway, so like success is something I only dream about. Like before you go to sleep, you kind of think, oh, what if this happened? What if that happened? And wouldn't it be amazing if this happened? And like all those stuff has happened, like all the massive press coverage, all the sales, and just people's expectations and the publishers' expectations, and everyone has kind of been exploded. But it's kind of this is going to sound like a cliche, but I'm going to go with it anyway. But, Desi's basically people, Asians, anyone of like the empire who like comes to this country, when they come to this country, they like support their businesses that are people in a similar position. And so like, I think that yes, it's been really popular with people who like pubs in general and beer in general, but I think it's been really popular with a more wider audience, with people who are like interested about empire, racism, that kind of thing. And it's kind of quite surprising when you get a huge audience for something, which I'm not used to. I'm used to just having a niche. And so when people like specifically tell me that they're going to all these different pubs and going on the same journey I went on, I just feel really proud to have facilitated that.
What I wanted to touch on, because I know you mentioned, I guess, kind of the historical origins of Desi Pubs, and I just wanted to kind of discuss that a little bit more with you, because I think it's just super, super exciting to kind of get into that.
So the first Desi pub was opened in Leicester in 1962 by a guy called Soham Singh, and he was a crane driver. He wasn't a publican by trade, and I think he really got the pub because he had a white wife, and the newspapers kind of objectified her, said she was really beautiful and all this kind of stuff, and deeply problematic at the time and now about dual heritage relationships. And then that pub was kind of anomaly, and I think the brewery begrudgingly gave it to him because he had loads of non-white customers. But the real sort of battle and the history of them came about because of the colour bar. The colour bar is where pubs were segregated due to race. So, for example, a very famous example is Smethwick, where pubs were segregated, like people couldn't go into the smoking room or the lounge area. And then Malcolm X was shown these pubs in the early 1960s, just shortly before he died. And they were really sort of first set up from the 60s, 70s onwards as safe places for brown people to drink, because they weren't either safe or allowed to drink in other pubs. And then sort of the big changing point for them became the smoking ban, because the smoking ban meant that pubs were more likely to serve food. And now people sort of think that a Desi pub is a pub that serves Indian food, as this guy was very telling me last night, because I included the Blue Gates, which is the pub Malcolm X visited, because it's owned by this guy Jat Singh, and I think it's really good. But he's like, that's not a Desi pub, that doesn't serve Indian food. And I think I kind of people are very passionate about this, but I wanted to say that's kind of the exception that proves the rule. And then in London, the sort of history of them is that in the 1980s, people wanted to open up pubs, but the licenses for serving alcohol and food didn't quite allow it. So they had to set them up as sort of members-only club. And they had blacked out windows. Lots of people in the area thought they were strip bars, but they actually, with the membership, that it was like anyone could be a member, come and join and come in and drink. And so that's, yeah. And then today they've morphed into this thing where it's very multicultural, brown and white people mixed together, different tables, and it's sort of, I think they're the best of Britain, and they were the vanguard of multiculturalism.
I know you visited, it says 200 pubs on your tour. Is there?
I did, yeah. I visited 200, but I've written about 60 to 80, because what I decided to do was, instead of just writing about the best pubs or whatever, I decided to tell the best stories. So although it's a guidebook, it also is an exploration of the landlord's stories, and within that, that's the lens that you sort of can use to go into multicultural Britain.
Was there anything that surprised you while you were on this process, and on this journey?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, I have to admit, I'm not very well travelled when it comes to this country. And I don't think many of us are. We stick to what we know. We go to a few places. And things like Airbnb don't really help us out in that thing, because we stick to the kind of place that we know, that kind of thing. So I'd never really been to Smethwick before. And if I was being honest, I'd never been to parts of West London before, or North London. And so when I went to Smethwick for the first time, and it was when lockdown restrictions had eased, I kind of expected them to be very sort of brown places with just lots of desis inside. But actually what I found that it was very mixed, and white people loved them just as much as their Asian friends. And so going through that was quite a shift to me, because I just thought that these places were enclaves, or even, if I use a horrible word, I don't want to use that word, I was going to say ghettos, but I hate that word anyway. But I would thought that they're not this kind of mixed environment. And really what we found is that I found doing this is that it sort of challenged my notions of class. And I think that assumptions that I've made, and we all make really, which sometimes form racial overtones, like racial bias, but they're mainly sort of class-based things. And it really was the discovery of the Midlands that really sort of opened me up to how, sort of not prejudice, but how I had an unease. But then when I went there, these people were the most friendliest people imaginable. And I'm a big lover of pubs. And I love the idea of going to a bar and just chatting to people. And this is just totally the norm. And I think really what pubs offer is social cohesion, because we value them as community enterprises. But that really fits well with being a Desi Pubs, and particularly with Sikhism. So a lot of these landlords in these areas. So I'd say like 90% of this book is a Punjabi story. And so Sikhism has this real tradition of community service, like giving out free food to those who need it, that kind of thing. And so it was all those kind of stories that I really tapped into. And I just really hadn't really considered that aspect of it before. I sort of went in with this book thinking I want to change the default of the landlord of being a white male. And I think I completely exploded that on the first visit of one of these pubs. Because it wasn't like he's the gaffer. They view it as like they're among the customers, and they eat with them and drink with them, and they're the best landlords, And I think that's what Desi really means. It means home, like it means like what India was like back in the day. But it also, that home thing means that the pubs are like, they treat them like you're entering their home. And I think that's why it's a bit crazy, because that's what I've always thought all pubs should be like. And so I kind of found what the greatest genre of pubs are, just what pubs are like in general and should be like.
Yeah, I'm so happy you got to spend some time in Smethwick. My dad lives in Smethwick, so I spend a lot of time there. So if you're ever there again, we
I'm
can
always
definitely
there. I'm always
go
there.
for a
I'm
pint.
like looking for all the time, looking for different ways to go. There's like
Yeah,
coaches
brilliant. Well,
from
you've got another
Southall
excuse
and
now. You can
yes.
meet me.
Oh, I don't need it. Yes, it is really brilliant. I want and he said I want more people to do these kind of journeys and see these pubs and really like go on them because it's not that nerve wracking really. They're set up for visitors. You know, yesterday I was at the Red Lion at West Bromwich, and he has 90% of his customers travelling from other areas because it's so
Yeah.
good.
I wondered if you'd be happy to give us a little taster of, I guess, some of the stories that you've most enjoyed or that surprised you that will
Hmm.
entice people that haven't got the book to go out and rush there and buy it now.
So as a sort, it's a journalistic approach, and so journalism for me is the thrill of the chase. It's all about finding the story, and this was a very difficult book to put together because I don't think anyone answered emails saying I want to come up. So I went to. I still can't believe I did this. I went to Glasgow to visit a guy who wasn't answering my Instagram messages. You know, so I was like, so when you go there and then they really kind of like because they don't really. I think it'd be easier now if I was doing a second edition of the book or whatever. It'd be a lot easier. They can show them the book and everything like that. But because it's like I'm writing a book, they're like, well, why is that and everything? It's look. Their sort of reticence was from their culture being constantly undervalued by like mainstream media and also a bit by themselves. Like my parents never gave me this kind of culture, even though they had it and everything like that. There was a kind of like lack of confidence in their culture. So once I did that, I kind of then broke them down, and then they would tell me their stories, and they'd always say, "Look, it's not very interesting. It's not like and then they'll tell me, and it's like." This is one of the most interesting things I've ever heard. You know, you've just explained an area, you've explained your life, you've explained Britain. This is really, really good stuff. And I knew the book would be excellent. And so one of my favourites was in a place called New Southgate, which is North London, and it's sort of in between Arsenal Stadium and Spurs Stadium. The guy who runs it grew up in sort of the area. He's probably a little bit older than me. He'd be in his 50s, and he said that when he was growing up in school, there people were very racist. They called him the P word, that kind of thing. And then he said, but they're actually my customers. And I was like quite shocked by that. And I was like, you forgive them? And I said, of course I forgive them because they came in, they said they're sorry. They said it was a long time ago and our area has changed. And so he now has them as his best friends. And that just is a kind of thing that we don't really see that much in Britain when we talk about racism. I was always of the opinion that people can't change. It's either like white flight, where people who are racist leave for other areas. But actually, there are people who stayed with it and did this thing of actually, okay, I'm going to give it a go. My area is changing, but let's see what happens. And these areas are enriched because of it. And that's why I find this sort of right wing narrative of invasions and all this kind of stuff, it really isn't true when you actually go and do the nitty gritty work and go and sit with people and talk with them. I mean, I just love going to pubs and I just love talking to people in pubs. And so that's what this book was. I'd go, I mean, it'd be a very dull book, in my opinion, if I just went to these pubs and talked about mixed grills or curries, which are great, but I can't do that 80 times, you know. So, and what the interesting stories are around them and everything like that. And that's really why it's popular, I think. There are people who do buy it for to find places to eat and everything like that. But I think the real the real lovers of the book are the people who are hearing the stories and finding it resonating with their lives.
When you were on this journey, I know that you said you weren't as well travelled. In terms of highlighting particularly Desi pubs that kind of mean a lot to you in terms of significance, is there any that you want to, I guess, talk to us about, just so we get to know you a bit more?
Yeah, so so it has to be pointed out that I'd never had this when I was growing up. So I grew up in a market town in Bedfordshire. The sort of pubs I had were pretty awful. Like the first time I went for a drink, I walked through the door and they said like taxi, they called me a taxi driver because that was the only sort of Asian representation they had. So I just tolerated that kind of stuff, or just went to other places. I guess there's sort of like I describe it as sort of like a spectrum of pubs. So you've obviously got that at the lower end, that's like not a great pub to go in. And then at the higher end, you have pubs where I'm more than welcome and they chat to me and everything like that. But I think if I came in with a group of Asian lads, we sat down and asked them to change the Spotify to Bangra, they'd probably forget the password pretty quickly. So, and but that's to say I don't like. That's to say I don't not like going into those pubs at all. I'm just sort of making a sort of a point about them. But the first experience was in 2006. I went, or 2007. It doesn't really matter exactly. We were working in Borough, and I went to this pub called the Blue Eyed Maid, and it had like karaoke. But upstairs it had an Indian restaurant called Chutney Jade, and it had a team of bouncers who were brown, and it was run by this Bangladeshi guy called Jay. But it's quite an anomaly that, because I've never in my travels met anyone from Bangladesh running one of these pubs, because I don't think he drank, but his bouncers definitely did drink. But the point was, I felt really empowered by these people, by seeing this living and breathing in these kind of spaces that I thought were white spaces. And so I went to find more. And then round the corner is the Glad, which you can see on the backdrop, where we launched the book. That's run by Meg and Gaurav. They've just become like very, very good friends. In fact, I love them. You know, they're family, really. And they ran this pub. They took it over from Camera in 2016. And, Camera saved the pub, and they took it over in 2016. And they did a few little tweaks, like sort of Anglo-Indian food, as they call it, like mutter paneer pies, chicken tikka pies, that kind of thing. But most of all, they're just really, really friendly people. So when you walk in, it's a bit like what you're used to in Smethwick, Kimberly. They sort of introduce you to the regulars. And for a London pub, that's quite special, I think. And then obviously, I think the other big one is the Scotsman in Southall, because Southall has always been a place that's been, I'm just going to be honest about these kind of things. I've never really felt comfortable being in majority Asian spaces because I wasn't brought up that way. But when I started to go, I started to get Southall, that basically Southall is a bit crazy, that it is kind of like all different parts of India put together, and very loud, brash and vibrant. And then get your head around that, it's actually really exciting to go. And the Scotsman is in there, and it has like jumbo giant naans, that kind of thing. And it is really kind of like, it's exceptional, really. It's like old fashioned pub. The sort of downside to it being old fashioned is I wouldn't exactly say it's an inclusive space, say for women. Punjabi drinking culture, if it can be very traditional. So if it's traditional, it's not always inclusive. Punjabi men had a strong drinking culture in the foundries, that kind of thing. They would drink alone, wouldn't drink with their wives, that kind of thing. Or a lot of them came out on their own from India. But that's changed a lot in all of the places I visited in Smethwick and West Brom. They've all become very family friendly. And so there's just a few in the book that aren't like that. And I'd say the Scotsman on certain times of the day can be like that. But I have been with women and children in there, and it's been fine.
What did you want to, I guess, feelings to evoke with the Desi Pale Ale? And I just wondered if you could talk to us about the collab in general.
Yeah, so I have to say that if you're using the word collab is doing Nidhi a huge disservice, because I was so busy with the book that I really didn't have much input in this, apart from the fact that I knew the sort of background with White Rhino, and Ishan, who was the brewer, and at the time he's a good friend of mine, so it was very special to try and recreate that kind of beer for me, and it was really important to get a beer that was a sort of India origin. You know, and it really is, to call it a Desi beer really is the only kind of beer that you can say that, because it's brewed by Nidhi, the recipe was first worked in India, and then it has these kind of spices and ingredients that are thrown in. And I think what I tasted it on my book launch. I had too many pints of it, let's be honest. And I thought it was actually brilliant, and a wonderful way to celebrate my book.
What do you want to happen from here? Because I know you've had such a wild ride already, but what are your hopes for the future?
I think it's quite a difficult question, because I'm in the midst of it all. And if I was being brutally honest, it was very difficult to put together the book because I've got a young family, and it was a lot of juggling of childcare when I was going around the country. So I was like, said to myself, my next book is either very home based, or I wait a few years for the next thing. I do think that like it would be good to do a book which has more of the pubs in. So maybe on the second edition, third edition, lots of people who live in certain areas were like, well, why didn't you include this? Why didn't you include that? And my answer to them is, well, I approached the people and they never got back to me. And so I couldn't go do the thing I did in Glasgow to every single pub. I mean, it was just impossible. So there are places like Wolverhampton, which I don't feel that covered that well, and Harrow in London, another one and Uxbridge, Hayes, where I went to university. So I think you perhaps could double the size of the book. And there were ones where people opened up them in villages, which were just, because I don't drive, well, I don't have a car, they were just totally difficult to get to, and I couldn't do them. There was one I just considered doing so much, that was in Cambridgeshire, where the landlords go shooting, and they do all that kind of stuff in all their gear and everything like that. And these things, but then you run out of funding for these kind of projects. They wanted me to stay over for a weekend, that kind of thing. And so I think that now that we've got like the sort of the clamour is there, that the next editions will have a huge scope and probably double in size. I'll be honest with you, like my publisher was always saying, can I have a pub list? Can I have a list? Like when I was doing the book, and I was like, don't think I'm really going to do this, Alan. I think I'm going to have to, you're going to have to trust me on this. And so, and then he was kind of bowled over by the amount. I think his kind of like thing was like, are there going to be enough pubs? And I was like, of course there's going to be enough pubs, but I can't tell you which ones exactly. Because I think here on this, it's, I met this guy in Hounslow in a pub, and he was called Harry Mungali, and he said, you don't want this to be a posh Egon Ronay guide. This has to be David Jesudason's best Desi Pubs. And I think that that's what I kind of stuck to. And Harry's words really formed the book. They were the ones that I just liked the best because of the stories told by the landlords. And I think he meant that like this, but he was funny though, because he was fully into going into the pub and it being like an experience. It's not necessarily about the food, it's about the chat and everything like that. And so when I told him about the books thing, he was like, I just want to buy it. It's going to be a great success. And so they kind of, speaking to someone like Harry made me feel that like, yes, actually, this could be a really good project.
Have you got any final thoughts for everybody? The floor is yours.
Well, now you put me on the spot there.
I know I did.
Yes,
I like to do that,
yes.
just to see what happens.
Yeah. So I think like as a writer, I've sort of had like a lot of isolation, but this book opened things up for me socially as well. So I started going to these pubs with Gurav at the Glad I mentioned behind me, and Mark Machado went to a lot of these pubs with me, and we just sort of would sit on a train and would sort of break down all the themes like that. And I owe a lot of thanks to people like that who came with me on these journeys, and Ishan Puri, who I mentioned for White Rhino, who really just enjoyed all the stuff that I did, and then realised, yeah, this is going to be a big thing.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking time to spend with me today. It's been
absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Great to get to know
you for having
you more,
me.
and I will look forward to more pints with you in Smethwick or Wolverhampton or even West Brom.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
You've got more excuses. Thank you so much.
No worries.